I'm Mark Loux at Ohio State University. I'm standing in the herbicide screen for the 2015 Wheat Olympics, and this is a walk through the graduate plots to give you some idea of your rationale that you could have used to solve the test. On my right here is number 2, which was saflufenicil, and the screen here was actually heavy on, I think, when you walk through a screen and you try to solve it, you got to do several things. You have to look for symptomology, and sometimes you're looking for that on the edge of the plot, not where the full rate was. You're looking for spectrum of control, right? So you're looking for a couple things like that, and then you're walking. If we have 10 plots on the screen, you actually need to look at the rest of them because you know all the herbicides that could be in the screen, and you're doing some process of elimination, right? Saflufenicil is on my right. Saflufenicil is labeled for corn and beans both, and you can see it's pretty safe. It's primarily a broadleaf herbicide. It was applied pre-emergence, so it left pretty much all the grass and the soybeans, of course, and then took out some of the broadleaves. And if you keyed in on a few specific broadleaves, if you'd studied this one, you'd be able to further identify it. But I think it's the only probably that looks like this in the screen that left all the grasses quite that intact. Number 6 is dicamba, and we had 3 growth regulators out here. Oh, by the way, saflufenicil is a PPO inhibitor, site 14. So this is dicamba, which is a growth regulator, site 4. So we had 2,4-D, dicamba, clopyralid. The clopyralid, if you were doing process of elimination looking for symptomology, you could find the clopyralid plot because it had symptomology and left some plants like pigweeds and lamb's quarters. The 2,4-D plot and the dicamba plot really took out most of the broadleaves. The dicamba plot, in this case, whether it's necessarily indicative or not, is leaving some of the canola. And then if you looked at the 2,4-D plot, you saw more of that grass stem flattening and flopping over, which is more typical generally with 2,4-D than it is with dicamba. Number 8 is benazon, and then right next to it, number 5 was fomesifin, and I think these were very tough to tell apart. Earlier on, before we had more rain and a week ahead of the contest, you could see some symptomology on the corn from the fomesifin, which is here. There's largely not much symptomology. It looks like maybe the soybeans are a little bit smaller, so you know it's primarily going to be a soybean herbicide, and at least one of these has safety on corn. Both of them left most of the grass, which is typical for them. So then you're looking for a few other things through here. We did find some injury symptoms somewhere in here from the fomesifin on something. Also, the benazon is generally pretty safe on alfalfa and did leave it a little bit better than the fomesifin did. Also, if you poke through here, there's a couple other indicators in the natural weed population. Fomesifin being generally good on pigweeds, not good on lamb's quarter, and benazon being relatively decent on lamb's quarter and rotten on pigweeds. And so you can see that there's some pigweed surviving in the benazon plot, possibly in some lamb's quarter surviving over here. But those were tough to tell apart, for me anyway. We had a couple different ALS inhibitors out here. So on my left here we had nicosulfuron, which I think was the only ALS inhibitor out here that left the corn pretty much completely intact, and it took out the sorghum, being very good, that nicosulfuron being very good on Johnson's grass shadowgain sorghum. And it's actually, it's pretty good on certain broadleafs. It actually took a lot of the broadleafs out of here fairly well. Stunted the soybeans. I'm not sure there's a lot of really great ALS symptomology in here. You can see a little bit, maybe down in here, some yellowing and a little bit of the small leaf development on that giant ragweed. And then right across the alley here was trifloxysulfuron, which is a very broad spectrum ALS inhibitor. You can see some symptomology in here. And the purpling, you don't necessarily see it with the other ALS inhibitors that were in the screen, but this purpling down here can be typical of ALS. And there's a little bit of other symptomology like the lamb's quarter doing some of this type of symptomology. The small leaf, and ALS inhibitors do cause some symptoms that mimic growth regulators very slightly in some cases. Beyond that, we don't work with this herbicide really, so the spectrum of control is something that if you had studied, you could obviously have known very well. Number 9 was metribuzin. Now we had metribuzin and atrazine both in the test. They both were very active, and some of the other pre-herbicides in here were not quite as active. So telling the two apart, if you were walking through, you knew, okay, it was a pre-herbicide. The atrazine left took out essentially everything except the corn and the sorghum. And the metribuzin took out, this is actually way more activity than metribuzin typically can provide, but it's a pretty high rate of it. So there's more grass in here. I left the Morning Glory, which metribuzin is not a strong Morning Glory herbicide. It's also not generally a great herbicide on large seeded broadleafs like sunflower and cockleburr and giant ragweed. So those are here. And then the other key was the atrazine took out all the alfalfa, and metribuzin is not labeled for use at the time of alfalfa planting, but alfalfa has some tolerance of metribuzin compared to atrazine. Number 10 was glufosinate. We had glyphosate, glufosinate, and paraquat. They all were very active. It could be tough to tell them apart. The giveaway in the glyphosate plot was canola, which was Roundup Ready canola, right? The paraquat plot, really, there wasn't much symptomology and annihilated everything. And then you've got the glufosinate plot here, and you can see some symptomology on the corn still. Glufosinate doesn't necessarily completely kill corn, as we know from when we're trying to replant corn stands, and you can see some of the symptomology of that site of action on there, right, which is glutamine synthase inhibitor. So other than that, it could be tough to tell those apart. I can't recall from previous screens, the glufosinate also left some of the canola as well. Number 4 is misotrione, which is an HPPD inhibitor. We had this and tembotrione. They were both applied post-emergence. The symptomology on these actually was way better about a week before the contest. They both left the corn, pretty much took out the soybeans pretty well. One of the key differences here was that the tembotrione took out more of the grasses, and very specifically took out the sorghum very well. The Callisto leaving the sorghum here. You can still see some white symptomology though, so you should have walked in the plot and said, okay, I see white. And it was applied post-emergence, so I know it's one of these two herbicides, and then you're looking for those specific differences. And then the last one is number 7, which was clomazone, applied pre-emergence. And this is, I think, fairly representative of clomazone. It's a grass herbicide that also has activity on lamb's quarter and velvet leaf and a few other broadleafs, but it's actually labeled for some horticultural crops, right, like pumpkins, so you can see the pumpkin surviving very well in the back. We would have probably expected to see more damage on corn, but you know, we had a little bit of a funky rainfall pattern for this screen. And you can see on the sunflower some very nice symptoms of the white. So when you apply clomazone pre-emergence, you still can get plants to come up with some symptomology, and you see the white. And it really was the only pre-emergence applied herbicide of that site of action out here. So hopefully that's helpful to you if you go back and look at your score and your sheet, and maybe this will be helpful for you next year as well.